I don't believe in carb cycling. That's just ridiculous. It's just basically an excuse to engage the Randall cycle. There's no need for it. It's just a sort of a modern preoccupation. Even tribal societies in the modern era only have seasonal, and that's to fatten up. That's the whole purpose of combining sugar and fat together, is to basically engage the Randall cycle and fatten up. That's the purpose of it. It's useful if you're in an environment where animals have become leaner, like they have in the last 20,000 years. But prior to that, they were much fatter, and we relied on that fat source directly, and we had sort of frost right down to the tropics at the time. But now that's not the case. We're in an interglacial period, much warmer period. So we do have seasonal starch and fruit, and tribal people do use it to engage. Not the Maasai, not the Inuit, but the Hadza usually use seasonal starch because they tend to basically have very little capacity to have enough energy in their environment. So the animals are slightly leaner, so they tend to basically be very lean through for parts of the year, and then towards the end of the season, when the fruit's around and the tubers around, they will cook that stuff and combine it with the fattier animals and engage the Randall cycle and fatten up for those other leaner months. And they cycle. You can actually see them, even the sand people, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, the same thing. You can actually look at their photos that are taken in different seasons, and they've either got absolute very little body fat on them, and other times they've got a bit of pungent, a bit of fat there, because that's the whole purpose. Fat is basically a storage or form of energy. That's what it's useful for. We just have too much because we constantly engage the Randall cycle by combining carbs and fats in large amounts, and in particular winter, when you shouldn't be at all. Summer, when it's available seasonally, we also have the ability to because of the deuterium thing, levels that are much higher in sugar that can damage your mitochondria and reduce your energy capacity as you become older. You don't want that sort of stuff at all in your diet, Russell. Not one iota. So fat usually tends to be the mark in terms of parts per million is about 130. So all sugars are around 140 to 160, depending on the sugar type. The more refined, the more there is. And when you're looking at animal fats, they're basically between olive oil is 130, smack on the limit. And things like tallow and all that are about the 120 mark. And butter and all that. Lard, pig's fat and bacon are much lower, 115 to even lower than that. Like bacon on its own, that means with the protein added and everything, it's about 113, where the normal lard is 115. So go figure. It just may be the part of that body that where the bacon comes from is much lower in general deuterium for whatever reason. Something to do with the physiology of the way it stores those areas of the body. But fish, slightly even lower, but the problem is DHA may be very low, like 102 parts per million, but you can't oxidize it and use it for energy. So it's a moot point. It's more of a structural material. But yeah, it's really interesting. The sort of, and I don't subscribe to carb cycling. I just think it's people that are basically ignorant of the biochemistry and don't understand a number of things and think that you need it. You don't. Your body can produce enough glucose for its red blood cells, for its brain, and a number of your organs that may need a small amount of glycosylation. That means what I talked about earlier about the pericellular matrix and other parts of tissue that need some level of glycosylation of those proteins, small amounts. And the glycocalyx, which is on the surface, the little hairline structures, which is on the surface of the actual cells that need some level of glycosylation. The body can do all that. Even the small amount of fructose that you require, exceptionally small, the body can use glucose, so it can actually turn the backbone of the glycerol, the backbone of the actual fat, and certain gluconeogenic amino acids like alanine into basically glucose, and then convert some of that into fructose, a small amount that the body requires. So no requirement. Even the USDA recognizes there is zero physiological requirement. You got Maasai, you got other populations that don't consume any sort of carbs of any significant level, like a lot of Westerners, and you've got other tribal populations like the San people, the Kalahari, they consume practically zero. They even the nuts that they consume as a treat is basically like our macadamia nuts don't have any carbohydrates in them. So they basically live in an arid environment. It's nothing to plant, nothing to grow. You know, they get a bit of deuterium depleted water from leaves, which they put into a little ostrich sort of egg container. Very different in that regard. So there is no real reason for it. It's just basically we've been addicted for the last couple of thousand years, and we still can't get our mindset around that the non-requirement, and that if we provide ourselves with enough protein and fat, we'll have the energy and we'll have the structural material to basically have good functioning bodies. So, but unfortunately, the propaganda is strong out there, and I vehemently disagree with these people that think that carb cycling is a good idea. It's not. And their thyroid nonsense is absolutely nonsense, because even when you actually go into a more lower grade, your TSH comes down as well. Normal, it's not as if it goes up and the other ones go down. That can be pathology, but it doesn't. It just comes down. And most centenarians are actually running in that lower grade anyway. So they just naturally, because of their genetics, they have higher clearance, and so they can actually run it at this lower grade. Not very low, because that's too catabolic, but in this lower grade compared to somebody eating carbs. And that is actually a sign of longevity. Higher carbohydrates, the so-called high metabolism nonsense, basically it means that you're actually cell dividing much faster. Not a good thing if you want a long life. Definitely not a good thing. Higher cell division. So it's nonsense pretty much in that regard. If you want to remain youthful for longer, keep away from the carbs. Listen to the camels, the deuterium depleting machines. They got a very low deuterium diet based on fat, and you can't tell the difference between how old they are. Very hard because of low deuterium. They maintain very high mitochondrial health right through until cell division stops, and they are snuffed out at that point. That's the difference. We do a lot of mitochondrial damage because of high carbohydrates, and our mitochondria decline. That's why we can engage the Randall cycle and become diabetic or whatever at a much lower gradient. Sometimes we find it very hard, unless we go to zero carbs, to actually to be able to lose anything or work or feel proper again. So, nah, it's nonsense.